In this module, we dive into more detail discussing the great conflict of our time, the conflict of justice. This conflict is between the two remaining and contradictory theories of justice, social good and natural rights. To better understand what the social good definition of justice looks like, let's briefly study Alice in Wonderland's experience, in which she describes an odd race with a dodo, a duck, and several other curious creatures.
First, Dodo marked out a race course in a sort of circle.
The exact shape doesn't matter,
It said, and then all the party were placed along the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3 and away, but they began running when they liked and left off when they liked, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so, the dodo suddenly called out,
The race is over.
and they all crowded round it, panting and asking, "But who has won?" This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, while the rest waited in silence. At last the dodo said,
Everybody has won, and all must have prizes.
"But who is to give the prizes?" Quite a chorus of voices asked.
Why, she, of course.
Said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded round her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!"
Let's go back and analyze this race a bit. A race with no structure, rules, or accountability. A race with an arbitrary finish. A race with the referee making things up as it goes along. A race where everyone wins, with equal reward, independent of individual effort. A race that may sound great to everyone except the person who must cough up the prizes. Does this sound like a great game that you want to participate in? If so, ask yourself, whom do you think will be forced to provide the prizes? You may have heard the common phrase, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The social good theory of justice like this is really a push for equity, which means equality of outcome instead of equality of opportunity. To get this forced equality of outcome, advocates of the social good theory must ignore individual merit. The race actually stinks for everyone involved. It's not really a race at all. There is no growth, no development, no productivity. It is a total collapse of society into social loafing. Have any serious philosophers or political figures actually advocated playing such a silly game? Unfortunately, yes. What is the problem of making collective equality of outcome the measure of justice? The problem is the isms. Utilitarianism, socialism, collectivism, statism, which all give primacy to the group and logically end up trampling on individual rights by requiring brute force for actual implementation. These isms are not compatible with individual natural rights. They all derive from the primacy of consciousness. In this case, it is the collective consciousness of the overall society.
Utilitarianism is an ethical and philosophical theory that states that the best action is the one that maximizes utility, which is usually defined as that which produces the greatest well-being of the greatest number of people. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, described utility as the sum of all pleasure that results from an action, minus the suffering of anyone involved in the action.
The sticky question is, who decides who in the group gets the pleasure and who in the group gets the suffering? Utilitarianism is the subjective and deadly mental calculation, attempting to provide philosophical cover over the swamp of the social good theory of justice. This means statistically serving the greatest good for the greatest number, irrespective to the cost to any one particular individual. That is, certain individuals can be, and often must be, sacrificed for the greater good of the collective. All of this requires coercive force based on the notion of utility. Many horrible things can be and have been done to individuals in the name of the so-called greater good of society. Ayn Rand said,
Collectivism holds that the individual has no rights, that his life and work belong to the group, and that the group may sacrifice him at its own whim to its own interests. The only way to implement a doctrine of that kind is by means of brute force, and statism has always been the political corollary of collectivism. The absolute state is merely an institutionalized form of gang rule, regardless of which particular gang seizes power.
it doesn't matter which gang is in charge. In the end, collectivism is just mob rule by the group with the strongest might to enforce their arbitrary will. Karl Marx was upfront about the cost and means of implementing collectivism. He said,
"Society is undergoing a silent revolution, which must be submitted to, and which takes no more notice of the human existences it breaks down than an earthquake regards the houses it subverts." The classes and the races, too weak to master the new conditions of life, must give way.
Marx theorized that the only way to create a better utopian society was to completely destroy what he called the current corrupt version of selfish capitalist ideals and rebuild society anew from the ashes.
The socialist mission, in theory, is to address issues for the forgotten man, such as poverty, inequality, and exploitation. The forgotten man represents marginalized individuals who are bearing the burdens of society's problems without receiving much attention or assistance. Socialist idealists seeing such societal problems place blame for the forgotten man on oversimplified arguments such as selfish individualism or crony capitalism for all societal problems. With individualism and free market capitalism gone, the socialist ideal then becomes a collectivist, abstract social experiment disconnected from actual reality. Socialist idealists get some abstract utopian theory in their head and then want to start forcibly adding people to it. Never mind that the idealists have no idea about how to actually get from the problems they see in the current system to their utopian ideal. But they trust that they'll figure out this gap, somehow, after they have burned down the old system to make way for the new one. The deadly philosophy is burn it down now, figure out the reality gap later. What actually ends up filling the gap? Revolt and repression. This social experiment has been tried many times, with the same disastrous outcomes each time. The socialist vision is always utopia, but the socialist reality is always Siberia or some form of it, like concentration camps, secret police, long bread lines, and empty shelves. In the end, they are trying to run a collective rights game like what Alice participated in the dodo race, forcing everyone to be equal in outcome, regardless of individual effort, merit, or talent.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau said,
"The first man who, having enclosed a piece of land, thought of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. How many crimes, wars, murders, how much misery and horror the human race would have been spared if someone had pulled up the stakes and filled in the ditch and cried out to his fellow men, 'Beware of listening to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to everyone, and the earth itself belongs to no one.'"
Vladimir Lenin said,
"The whole of society will have become a single office and a single factory with equality of work and equality of pay."
The history of collectivism just doesn't play out peacefully like Rousseau and Lenin would lead us to believe, as if abolishing property rights magically causes conflict to disappear. It's all theoretical gymnastics until one realizes that one needs property, food, shelter, and clothing to sustain one's actual life. An attack on individual property rights is an attack on the means of maintaining one's life. A friend of mine who previously lived in a former communist bloc country explained to me the disastrous outcome from this egalitarian philosophy. He told me the joke among the factory workers was, "They pretend to pay us, so we pretend to work." Redistribution of wealth is how Lenin's factory provided the prizes. In practice, this meant everyone received an equal amount of poverty as actual production plummeted, workers socially loafed, and they ran out of other people's wealth to redistribute. Of course, a game that takes your property and passes it out to everyone else as prizes means you are not going to want to voluntarily participate. Then what?
The gap between rich and poor can't be resolved without deliberate inequality-busting policies, and too few governments are committed to these.
In practice, those in power must force participation, sacrificing individuals in the name of greater good. It begs a deeper question. Who decides what is the greater good, and which individuals must be sacrificed?
Many have spoken out against this social good definition of collective rights in defense of natural rights. Brigham Young said,
"Supposing that the property of the whole community were divided today equally amongst all, what might we expect? Why, a year from today, we should need another division, for some would waste and squander it away, while others would add to their portion."
Ayn Rand said,
Of special significance to the present discussion is the egalitarians' defiance of the law of causality, their demand for equal results from unequal causes, or equal rewards for unequal performance.
Mortimer Adler said,
"Only justice is an unlimited good. One can want too much liberty and too much equality, more than is good for us to have in relation to our fellow men, and more than we have any right to. Not so with justice. No society can be too just. No individual can act more justly than is good for him or for his fellow men." Justice is the supreme value, a greater good than either liberty or equality, and one that must be appealed to for the rectification of errors with regard to liberty and equality.
Only justice properly understood as the natural rights definition is an unlimited good. Lenin and Louis XVI had a different definition of justice, which caused them to make serious errors in their politics. Too much liberty is license or anarchy. Anyone doing whatever they want, whenever they want, regardless of the effect it has on others. Too much equality is the absurdity of the dodo race, as Brigham Young describes above.
What are rights?
Our natural needs are the basis for distinguishing between the real goods to which we have a natural right and the apparent goods to which we do not have a natural right. That is the acquirement of which we may be privileged on condition that our seeking them does not interfere with anyone else's acquirement of real goods.
George Mason said
that all men are born equally free and independent, and have certain inherent natural rights, of which they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety.
Much of Thomas Jefferson's writing of the Declaration of Independence was lifted from the previous Virginia Declaration of Rights and George Mason.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The American Founding Fathers based the American Revolution logically on the revolutionary idea that nature, not the king, gives rise to natural rights, that individual liberties are independent of any governmental authority. They describe equality under the law instead of the whim of an absolute ruler. Unalienable means unable to be taken away from or given away by the possessor. Unalienable means the majority can't vote rights away, individuals cannot contract their rights away, nor can anyone give these rights away themselves. They are unalienable because they are part of our unchosen, metaphysical human nature.
During the American Revolutionary War, American patriots were naturalists while the American loyalists were positivists. The divisive issue was, of course, whether the king is the law or the law is king. Here are the primacy issues for the natural rights definition of justice. The introductory paragraph to the Declaration of Independence says,
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
The Founding Fathers knew they were going against the philosophical tide of the majority of the whole world at the time. The great world powers at that time believed in absolute monarchies, that by God's will, the king is the law. The Declaration of Independence was a philosophical warning shot against the whole world at the time. It was philosophical combat against the positive law ideology of the divine right of kings, justifying in the eyes of the world a revolution based on natural rights philosophy. Mortimer Adler said,
Being by nature equal in kind, they are all endowed by nature with certain unalienable rights, unalienable because they are inherent in man's specific nature, not merely bestowed upon man by legal enactment. Legal enactment may be necessary to secure these rights, but it doesn't constitute their unalienability.
Because individuals have inherent natural rights doesn't mean those rights are actually secured and protected. This leads us to a discussion of the proper role of government being to secure rights, not grant rights.
Here is the fully assembled philosophy man, which is the way it is because of my life. Each higher branch is dependent upon the philosophical components below it. This means that as you move up the philosophical hierarchy, you can't drop the context of the foundation that came first below. Descriptive truths are the facts of reality. They constitute the axioms, metaphysics, and epistemology. These are the cold, hard matter of facts that exist independent of what we think about them. Prescriptive truths are the ought facts of reality. They constitute ethics, politics, and aesthetics. Is facts have primacy over ought facts. Rights are based on our human nature. We have a moral right to life, liberty, and property ownership in order to sustain our life in the pursuit of happiness. These are what we call individual or natural rights. Politics becomes an issue when you introduce another human life who also has individual rights with the potential to conflict and intrude upon the needs of my life. Once another person enters the scene, mutually protecting individual rights becomes the issue compared to anti-life and anti-rights issues such as theft, slavery, and violence. A moral right doesn't necessarily mean a protected right, however. To secure these rights, arbitrate claims, and establish justice, governments are instituted among men. From the eternalist perspective, our Constitution is the protecting umbrella covering everyone's rights. The same Constitution that protects my life also protects your life. Just because all humans equally have the same inherent natural rights doesn't mean those rights are actually enforced. Our moral rights become legal rights only when protected and enforced through the rule of law, with equality under the law. Everything from ethics and above is colored for me or against me. Proper government is a value in protecting our rights. Nothing could be further from the truth than believing that our religious lives can somehow be morally disassociated from our political choices. Politics matter because governments matter. Governments matter because safeguarding liberty matters. Safeguarding liberty matters because agency matters. And agency matters because there can be no bringing to pass the immortality or eternal life of man without it. Politics, governments, liberty, and agency all matter because immortality and eternal life is at stake.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to the Christian Eternalism YouTube channel and visit christianeternalism.org.